December 1986. A biting wind sweeps across the industrial outskirts of Joliet, Illinois. The kind of cold that doesn't just chill your skin, but settles deep into your marrow, turning the slush in the gutters into jagged grey glass. In a small, modest house on the edge of town, 10-year-old Sarah is pressed against the window pane, her breath fogging the glass as she watches the streetlights flicker on. It is Friday night. Her father, Hank Peterson, was supposed to pick her and her brother up 2 hours ago. He never misses a weekend. Hank is a former Greyhound bus driver who poured every cent of his savings into a small, struggling auto repair shop. He is the kind of man who smells like Pennzoil and Old Spice, a man who carries a Polaroid of his kids in his visor. But as the clock in the kitchen ticks past 9, then 10, then midnight, the driveway remains empty. Sarah's mother, weary from a long shift at the diner, finally pulls her away from the window. She tells the girl that her father is probably just busy with a late job. But there is a tremor in her voice. She knows Hank. He doesn't just disappear. But the police in 1986 see things differently. When Sarah's mother walks into the precinct the next morning, the air is thick with cigarette smoke and the frantic clacking of typewriters. The officer behind the desk barely looks up from his coffee. He sees a man with a mountain of debt, a struggling business, and a looming child support payment. To the state of Illinois, Hank Peterson isn't a missing person.
We need to get these reports typed up by...
He is a potential skip. A deadbeat who finally decided the pressure of the American dream was too much to handle. They tell her that a man has a right to disappear if he wants to. They tell her he probably hopped a bus to Vegas or crossed the border into Canada to start over. And just like that, the file is slapped shut before it's even been opened. For 23 years, Sarah and her brother would grow up in the shadow of that assumption, believing their father had traded his love for them for a clean slate and a pocketful of untraceable cash. They had no idea that while they were opening their Christmas presents that year, their father was already lying in a shallow grave, less than 20 miles away, waiting for a name that would not come for nearly a quarter of a century. I'm looking at the original crime scene photos right now. These are the old glossy 4x5s, yellowed at the edges, pulled from a box that hasn't been properly audited since the Reagan administration. The colors are muted, that strange, sickly 1980s hue where the reds look like dried rust and the shadows are deep, impenetrable black. It's December 8th, 1986. A hunter is walking his dog through an abandoned limestone quarry near the I-80 interchange. It's a desolate place, a graveyard of rusted machinery and discarded tires. His dog, a lab mix, starts frantically scratching at a pile of frozen debris at the bottom of a steep embankment. What he finds isn't animal. It's a man, or what's left of one. He's been stripped completely naked, no wallet, no watch, no wedding ring. Just a body dumped like a bag of trash in the freezing mud. The brutality is hard to stomach, even for a seasoned detective. The coroner's report, typed on a manual Smith Corona, lists 17 distinct points of blunt force trauma to the skull. 17. This wasn't just a murder. It was an execution fueled by a terrifying, localized rage. Look at this shot of the victim's hands. The detective on the scene, a man named Joe Miller, noted something peculiar. Despite the body being stripped to hinder identification, there were microscopic traces left behind. On the victim's palms, tangled in the blood and grit, were long, coarse hairs. Not human. Miller suspected they belonged to a dog, likely a German Shepherd. But in 1986, without DNA, without a national database, a few dog hairs and 17 hammer blows didn't give them a name. The victim was processed as John Doe number 412. He was buried in a potter's field under a plain stone that simply read ___, Quote underscore, 0 underscore underscore. For the next 2 decades, Joe Miller would keep a copy of that crime scene video, one of the first ever recorded on a bulky VHS camcorder in that district, on a shelf in his office. He said he couldn't stand the thought of a man being erased so completely. He would visit that nameless grave once a year, wondering who was out there, waiting for a man who would never come home. We have to talk about the deadbeat narrative, because that is what truly killed the investigation in its tracks. While Sarah was crying herself to sleep, the rumors in Joliet were metastasizing. The bank moved in on Hank's shop within months. The neighbors whispered about the shady characters he had hanging around the garage. Drifters he'd hire for cash under the table because he couldn't afford a real payroll. One of them was a guy named Clyde, a heavy drinker with a record for petty theft, who lived in a small room in the back of the shop. When the police finally did a cursory walkthrough of the garage weeks later, Clyde was gone. So was Hank's dog, a big shepherd named Rocky. The police assumed the two of them had simply moved on. They found Hank's car, a beat-up Chevy Nova, abandoned in a parking lot near the bus station. That was the smoking gun for them. In their minds, Hank Peterson had cleared out his register, ditched his life, and vanished into the American night. The stigma was so powerful that even Sarah's mother eventually stopped fighting. She had to protect her kids from the financial ruin Hank had left behind. She filed for a divorce in absentia, telling the court her husband had abandoned his family. The system agreed. The case was cold before the snow had even melted. Fast forward to the late 2000s. The world has changed. The clack of typewriters has been replaced by the hum of servers. Joe Miller is nearing retirement, but he still has that VHS tape. He manages to get the case featured on a national Quote 3 broadcast, a show that specializes in digging up the ghosts of the Midwest. They show a digital reconstruction of John Doe 412. It's a haunting image, a face built from the bone structure of a shattered skull. In a suburb of Chicago, a man named David is watching that broadcast. He sees the reconstruction, but more importantly, he hears the location, the old limestone quarry. His heart stops. He remembers that quarry. He grew up playing there with his brother Mike. He remembers a night in December 1986, a night when Mike and their cousin Clyde came home covered in mud, smelling of copper and fear. He remembers the way they talked about a Quote 4 that never materialized. For 23 years, David had carried a suspicion that felt like a lead weight in his chest. Seeing that face on the television was the final crack in the dam. He picked up the phone. The transcript of that tip-off call is chilling. You can hear the decades of guilt in David's voice. He tells the operator,
I told you.
Quote 5. He describes how Clyde and Mike had been working for a mechanic who wouldn't pay them a commission they thought they were owed. It wasn't thousands of dollars. It was $500. $500 for the life of a father of 2. David tells the police something they never would have found on their own. Check the floorboards of the old shop.
But that doesn't make
When
any
detectives
sense.
return to that now derelict building,
listen to me.
they pry up the rotted wood in the back room where Clyde used to sleep. There, tucked into a crawl space along with rusted tools and empty beer cans, they find a small leather wallet. Inside is a driver's license, Illinois, issued 1984. The face staring back at them is Hank Peterson. He hadn't gone to Vegas. He hadn't gone to Canada. He had been under their feet the whole time they were writing him off as a coward. The reconstruction of the crime is a descent into pure, unadulterated darkness. Based on David's testimony and the forensic evidence they could finally process with modern kits, the night of December 5th, 1986
I don't know how the money
comes into
got there.
focus.
You have to believe
Hank
me.
was closing up the shop. He was getting ready to go pick up Sarah and her brother. He had his keys in his hand. Clyde and Mike confronted him, They wanted $500 from a car sale they claimed they brokered. Hank, who was already drowning in debt, told them there was no money. He told them he had to go see his kids.
They know we're here.
That's when the hammer came out. A 5-pound club hammer from the workbench. 17 times they hit him. They didn't stop until the man they knew, the man who had given them a place to sleep and a job when no one else would, was unrecognizable.
Are you sure there's nothing left to salvage?
They spent the next few hours in a panicked, drunken haze. They stripped him naked to make sure no one could trace his clothes. They wrapped him in a greasy tarp from the shop floor,
This grinder
the
is
same
shot.
tarp that left
We
those
won't be able to
coarse
finish the
fibers
order
the
on
coroner
time.
found. And they drove him out to the quarry they knew from their childhood. They threw him over the edge like he was nothing. But there was one more detail that David provided that broke the detectives' hearts. The dog. Rocky. Hank's German Shepherd hadn't run away. After the murder, Clyde had taken the dog. He'd kept it for years, a living trophy of the man he'd slaughtered. That explained the hairs on Hank's palms. In his final moments, as he lay dying on that shop floor, Hank had reached out to his dog. He was looking for comfort as the lights went out. The police tracked down Mike, who was still living in the area, a shell of a man destroyed by his own choices. Clyde, the primary instigator, had already died in a high-speed motorcycle crash in the late 90s, an accident many in the family believed was a delayed suicide. When they sat Mike down in an interrogation room and showed him the photo of Sarah as a child, he broke. He didn't even ask for a lawyer. He just started crying. He told them everything. He told them how they'd burned Hank's clothes in a 55-gallon drum behind the garage. He told them how they'd left the Chevy Nova at the bus station to make it look like a flight. A 23-year-old lie dismantled in 23 minutes. I want you to imagine the moment Sarah, now a woman in her 30s with children of her own, received the phone call.
Stream.
For over 2 decades, she had carried a secret shame. In the back of her mind, she was always the girl whose father didn't love her enough to stay. She had walked through life with a hole in her heart, wondering what she could have done differently to make him come home that Friday night. When Detective Joe Miller sat her down and told her the truth, the pain was immense, but the relief was a tidal wave. Her father hadn't abandoned her. He was a hero who worked himself to the bone to provide for them. He was a victim of the very kindness he showed to the men who took his life. He was a man who died with his children's names on his heart. The __7__ was a ghost, a fiction created by a lazy system and a cruel rumor mill. The real Hank Peterson was finally coming home. The final piece of this archive is perhaps the most moving. It's a photograph from 2011. It shows a small cemetery in rural Illinois. There is a new headstone now, made of polished black granite. It doesn't say unidentified male anymore. It says, Hank Peterson, beloved father. Joe Miller, the man who never gave up, paid for the burial out of his own pocket before he retired. He said it was the only way he could finally sleep at night. He'd spent his career surrounded by the worst humanity had to offer. But this case taught him something about the power of an individual's legacy. Hank's story is a reminder of the thousands of John and Jane Does currently sitting in evidence lockers across the country. Men and women who have been written off by society because of their bank accounts, their addictions, or their struggles. They are someone's father, someone's daughter, and they are all waiting for someone to look past the deadbeat narrative and see the human being underneath. As we close this file, take a look at the last Polaroid in the stack. It's Sarah and her brother, sitting on the bumper of that old Chevy Nova in the summer of 1985. Hank is behind the camera. You can see his shadow stretching across the pavement toward them. He's reaching out. He's always reaching out. This case wasn't just about catching a killer. It was about reclaiming a man's honor from the dust of history. It took 23 years, a haunted brother, and a detective with a conscience. But the truth finally clawed its way out of that limestone quarry. The silence of the archive has been broken. Hank Peterson is no longer a number. He is a memory, cherished and restored. And in the end, that is the only justice that truly matters. The wind still blows cold in Joliet, but for Sarah and her family, the winter of 1986 is finally over.